Hey everyone! So this is the follow-up notes for our Ecological Succession activity that we did today, the board game that you played. This shouldn't take too long, and at the very end, answer all of the questions on that worksheet that you were given during class, and then turn that in when I see you next. Alright, let's get started. So what is succession? It is, in simplest terms, how ecosystems change over time. So if you have an acre of land and it starts out as soil, over time, what happens to it? How does it change? How does it look different over time? So we normally focus on the types and species of plant and animal life that come back, and we break those down into stages. Succession is essentially, there's two different types. We have primary succession and we have secondary succession. I'm going to start with secondary because I think it makes a little bit more sense. So with secondary succession, you start with soil. And so this could be something like an area has been deforested and become a field, or we had a forest fire and it destroyed everything in the area. There was a hurricane in the ocean and it wiped out all the sea life. That is the start of secondary succession. So that's the impetus or the cause of the succession. Now, what do you think would be the first organisms to return if you had just bare soil and nothing else? And why do you think that organism would be first to return? If you said grasses because they're hardier and they grow quickly, you'd be correct. Grasses are what we call a pioneer species. These are the first organisms to colonize an area during succession. Other pioneer species are things like lichens, wildflowers, ferns, bacteria, decomposers, insects, etc. Now, primary succession is a little bit different. This one doesn't begin with any soil, but rather bare rock. So this is an area that's never supported life before, or there is no soil for life to start. An example would be there's a volcanic eruption in the middle of the ocean and a new island forms, or just a volcanic eruption in like with Mount St. Helens. When that erupted, it covered the area with ash and sometimes lava, and when that hardens, you have bare rock. Also with glaciers, like in Yosemite, sometimes as the glacier pulls back and recedes, it destroys the area underneath it and can cut through rock and everything, and you're just left with rock behind. And what's going to grow on that rock? How can anything grow on rock and become like the islands of Hawaii that are these beautiful tropical paradises? Well, that is our lichens. Lichens are the main pioneer species for primary succession. They are a symbiotic relationship organism between a moss and a fungi. So they do photosynthesis and they're decomposers. So they have a lot of advantages. One of those advantages is they can actually take rock and break it down and turn it into soil or dirt where there was none in the past. So they are the pioneer species for primary succession. So here are a couple examples. The left picture is the Yosemite Valley, like I described. So you can see that this whole valley, it kind of looks like an aisle, and in that aisle you had ice just literally tear through the rock, and it left behind nothing but bare rock. And now you can see that it's this thriving ecosystem with tall pine trees and lots of animal life. On the right, this shows an area after a volcanic eruption. So you have all this volcanic rock and igneous rock, and you can see that there are some species starting to grow back. So this is a little bit later. It's not right after the lava flow, probably a little bit after the lichens have had a time to start building back the soil. Now, after you've gone through all stages of succession, you end with your climax community. And this marks the final stage where the ecosystem is balanced, stable, and has incredible biodiversity. Biodiversity just means the diversity of life. How many different animal, plant species are there in the area? As you get closer and closer to the climax community, biodiversity increases dramatically. I want you to think about why that might be and come prepared to class next time to be able to answer that one. So in Virginia, a climax forest would look a little bit like this. You have your pine trees, you have sometimes oak trees. Actually, it's the other way around. It's primarily oak and sometimes pine. You have animals like deer and raccoon. All of those are climax community species. Now, the stages, you start with your pioneer species, your grasses, lichen, moss, algae, etc. Then you move into your secondary species, your herbs and shrubs. Then you move into young forest, where you have small trees or trees that have just started growing. And finally, after sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of years, you reach a stable climax community. This community will undergo very few changes over the next few centuries. That's the key part of the climax community. Now, the Chesapeake Bay watershed that we currently live in used to be covered in forest. 90% of it used to be forest ecosystems. Today, it's only 60%. And most of that 60% is what we call fragmented or broken up into small pieces, and they're not connected with each other. So this is incredibly harmful to not only the watershed, but to the bay itself, because loss of forest leads to no more cover for prey animals to hide from predators, so they get over predated. Then you have loss of shade and cooling on your riverways, so the water in the rivers and the streams starts to heat up too much. You have increased erosion and pollution because trees will actually, with their roots, grip onto soil and prevent it from eroding away. Then you'll also have more areas where invasive species can infiltrate. If you have all of these fragmented woods, now you have twice as much surface area around the forest for a species to be able to attack and break down that forest, an invasive species, one that's not supposed to be there. Normally, when the forest is bigger, there's not as much space for it to kind of creep in and take over, but if it's all fragmented, there's more areas for them to take over. Now, aquatic succession we can see really well when we're talking about coral reefs. And right now that's actually become a big problem because all the coral reefs are undergoing something called bleaching. As ocean acidity rises because the temperatures are getting a little bit warmer in the ocean, all of the coral is dying and the bacteria that makes it colorful is dying as well. So you have these barrens where you have these dead coral skeletons. Now, some of them still support life because the fish can still use them in order to hide from predators, but the coral itself and all that brings to the area is no longer there. And we are currently studying how they would succeed, or how succession would occur in these communities, but we don't actually have a good example of a climax community in a coral reef because this succession is still so new for us to be studying. And why do you think it would be important for us to know that this occurs in the ocean as well? That's actually part of your article reading, so make sure you do that and turn that in next week. So this is all that I have for you guys today. Make sure you go on to your worksheet now and answer all those questions and be ready to turn that in at the start of next class. Thanks.